The diplomatic chamber aboard the Stellar Concordance station hummed with tension as Ambassador Lyra, Vex of the Hegemony Coalition, reviewed the human proposal for the third time. Her crimson eyes narrowed at the document displayed on the holographic interface before her. The proposal was audacious, borderline insulting, and entirely typical of the species that had somehow clawed its way into galactic politics despite having barely mastered fusion drives. "This is your solution?" Lyra's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who had negotiated treaties for 2 decades across 17 star systems. "You expect us to trust human engineering for the Perseus Gate reconstruction? The most critical transportation hub in 4 sectors?" The human representative, a man named Marcus Webb, sat across from her with an expression of such casual certainty that it made her scales itch. He wore the simple blue uniform of the Terran Engineering Corps, unadorned except for a single silver badge that denoted Master Builder status. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, and he had the lean build of someone who spent more time on construction sites than in diplomatic halls. "I expect you to look at the numbers, Ambassador," Marcus replied, sliding his own datapad across the table. "Human construction methods have a 99.7% success rate in extreme environments. We've built stations in neutron star orbits, mining platforms inside gas giants, and terraforming domes on worlds that would melt your exoskeleton." Lyra's secondary arms twitched in annoyance. The gesture was instinctive, a tell she had trained herself to suppress in negotiations. This human had noticed it, judging by the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. "Your species has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries, she countered. "The hegemony has engineered megastructures for 12,000 years. What could you possibly offer that we have not already perfected?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, that infuriating calm never wavering. "Speed, adaptability, and creative problem-solving. Your people build things to last millennia, which is admirable. But the Perseus Gate needs to be operational in 8 months, not 8 years. We can do it." "Confidence is not competence," Lyra snapped. "No," Marcus agreed. "But competence without confidence never gets anything built." The meeting ended without resolution, as Lyra had expected. She returned to her quarters on the station, her mind churning through alternatives. The Perseus Gate had been destroyed in the recent conflict with the Void Reavers, and its reconstruction was critical to maintaining trade routes that fed billions. The hegemony's own engineers estimated a minimum of 5 years for proper reconstruction using traditional methods. 5 years of economic strain, political instability, and suffering. The human proposal claimed they could do it in 8 months. It was absurd. It was reckless. It was exactly the kind of desperate gamble that had no place in proper galactic governance. And yet, Lyra accessed the files Marcus had provided. Construction records from human projects across their relatively small sphere of influence. She had dismissed them before, but now she studied them with genuine attention. The Titan Arch on Europa, built in 11 months instead of the projected 3 years. The Helios array around their home star, completed ahead of schedule despite a solar storm that should have delayed construction by seasons. The Frontier Habitat on the edge of the Kepler Abyss, a station that existed in conditions that made most species uncomfortable to even contemplate. The humans had a pattern. They succeeded where they should have failed. They built where others said it was impossible. They adapted faster than any species she had encountered. But was that enough? 3 days later, Lyra found herself in the observation deck, overlooking the Perseus Gate's ruins. The shattered remains of the ancient structure floated in the void like the bones of some cosmic beast. Repair drones from a dozen species moved among the debris, cataloging damage and beginning the slow process of salvage. Beautiful. In a tragic way, Marcus's voice came from behind her. Lyra turned to find the human engineer standing at the viewport, his gaze fixed on the ruins. He had not been invited to this section of the station, but she found herself unsurprised by his presence. "You have a peculiar definition of beauty," she said. "I see potential," Marcus replied. "Every broken thing is a chance to build something better." The gate was a masterwork of hegemony engineering. What could possibly be better? Marcus pointed to a section of the wreckage. "See that junction point? Classical hegemony design uses a triple redundant power coupling. Elegant, stable, nearly impossible to overload. But it also creates a bottleneck. Human design would use a distributed network with dynamic load balancing. Slightly less stable in theory, but far more efficient in practice, and easier to repair if something does go wrong." Lyra studied the wreckage with new eyes. She had not considered the inefficiencies of traditional design because they had always been good enough. But good enough was not the same as optimal. "Show me your plans," she heard herself say. The actual technical specifications, not the diplomatic summary. For the next 6 hours, Marcus walked her through the human proposal in exhaustive detail. The materials they would use, salvaged from the original gate, but reconfigured with human metallurgical techniques. The construction sequence, which involved building multiple sections simultaneously rather than the traditional foundation to apex approach. The safety protocols, which were surprisingly robust despite the accelerated timeline. And the innovations. So many innovations. Humans had taken 2 centuries of galactic knowledge, absorbed it like a sponge, and then had the audacity to improve upon it. Not through superior technology necessarily, but through sheer creative thinking and a willingness to challenge assumptions that other species had stopped questioning millennia ago. "You really believe you can do this?" Lyra said when the presentation concluded. It was not a question. "I know we can," Marcus replied. "The question is whether you trust us enough to let us try." Lyra was silent for a long moment. Trust was the commodity in shortest supply in galactic politics. Species aligned based on mutual benefit and calculated risk, not faith in each other's abilities. The hegemony had not survived 12,000 years by taking leaps of faith. But sometimes, she realized, survival required more than doing things the way they had always been done. "I will recommend your proposal to the High Council," Lyra said finally. "But I want to make something clear. If you fail, the consequences will not be borne by your species alone. Billions depend on the Perseus Gate. The economic impact of failure would destabilize entire sectors." "I understand," Marcus said. And for the first time, she saw the weight he carried behind that confident exterior. "That's why we won't fail." The High Council approved the human proposal by the narrowest possible margin. Lyra suspected her recommendation had been the deciding factor, a responsibility that settled on her shoulders like a physical weight. The construction began within a week. Lyra watched the human teams work with a mixture of fascination and anxiety. They moved with coordinated chaos that defied traditional construction protocols. Multiple teams worked on different sections simultaneously, communicating through a network of real-time data sharing that allowed for constant adaptation. When they encountered unexpected problems, which happened frequently, they did not halt construction to study the issue through proper channels. They improvised, experimented, and implemented solutions on the fly. It should have been a disaster. Every instinct Lyra had developed over 2 decades of diplomatic service told her that such methods would lead to catastrophic failure. Instead, the gate began to take shape ahead of schedule. Marcus became a fixture at the construction site, working alongside his teams in a way that would have been unthinkable for a hegemony director. He was in a pressure suit making welds one day and reviewing structural calculations the next. His crews followed his example, pushing themselves with an intensity that both impressed and concerned Lyra. "Do you ever rest?" she asked him during one of their regular progress meetings. "When the job is done," Marcus replied, though she noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. "We have 8 months to do what your people say requires 5 years." Every hour counts. And if something goes wrong? If all this haste leads to a structural failure? Marcus met her gaze steadily. Then we fix it and keep building. That's what humans do, Ambassador. We make mistakes, we learn, we adapt, and we keep moving forward. It's messy and inefficient, and sometimes things break. But it's also how we went from barely leaving our home planet to building alongside species that have been exploring the stars since before our recorded history. 7 months into construction, disaster struck. A solar flare, unpredicted by the hegemony's advanced warning systems, swept through the construction zone. 3 sections of the nearly complete gate were damaged, and 2 human workers were killed when their shuttle's shields failed. The project ground to a halt as teams assessed the damage and held memorial services for the fallen. Lyra stood beside Marcus at the ceremony, watching as the human crews said goodbye to their colleagues in their strange, emotional way. The hegemony had protocols for honoring the fallen, formal and dignified. The humans cried, told stories, laughed through tears, and held each other with an openness that made Lyra uncomfortable in its rawness. "I'm sorry," she said to you.